Hi teachers, the math coaches and I are glad you're here for the Monitoring and Assessing Small Group PD, so let's get started. To start our presentation, we're going to focus on the question of why taking anecdotal notes is really important. So 3 kind of points here with why we should even take anecdotal notes. The first being that they are an accurate documentation. There is a lot happening when you are at the back table. A lot of times we think as a teacher, oh, I'm really going to remember that conversation, or I'm really going to remember what I saw them do. But documenting is really the only way to ensure that you're going to remember. At the end of the day, you've met with lots of small groups, both in math and reading. You've had writing conferences, you've had parent phone calls, you've had conversations with staff. There's a lot going on, and so you want to ensure that you are remembering all of the important things that you're seeing in small groups. So anecdotal notes are really the only way to be sure that we're getting that accurate documentation for the conversations and observations from small group. The next one is that it is going to be driving your instruction. Through anecdotal notes, you're going to be able to start to notice patterns and misconceptions that individual students as well as entire small groups are demonstrating, and those patterns and those misconceptions are really going to be able to help you determine where it is that you should go next. And the last one being that anecdotal notes are a way to capture individual student growth. So your notes are going to help you see the progression that students make as they learn each new concept. So there's a lot going on. Each group is going to go through a different progression. Each student is going to go through a different progression. So your notes are going to be able to help you see what exactly was that progression that an individual student went through on their own journey of growth. Once we have a good understanding of why we need to take anecdotal notes, then we're in a place of, I get it, they're important, they're going to help me, but what is it that I'm supposed to write down? And I know that a lot of us went through this in our own classroom where we were taking notes, but we were writing down everything or anything that we saw or heard, and it just became a little bit messy. We weren't being able to use them as much as we knew we should be. So really honing in on, I know that I should be taking anecdotal notes, but what is it that I should be noting, monitoring, assessing when I have these students in small group? So 3 things that we feel are really important to have when you are taking notes, when you're monitoring and assessing. The first one being the concept understanding. Small group is when you are able to meet students exactly where they need their educational support at. So understanding whatever the concept is that you're teaching them, can they do the math? Do they understand the math? If I'm wanting them to do division using models, I need to be noting, can they divide using models? So that concept understanding of the math. The next one being that concrete, pictorial, abstract progression. Knowing that students should go through this progression within each new concept, you need to be noting what stage each individual student is currently in. And that's just going to help you facilitate that appropriate progression. We don't want to keep a student in pictorial if they've demonstrated an understanding in concrete and they've demonstrated an understanding in pictorial. We need to then move them to that abstract. If they are having a hard time in pictorial, we need to know to take them back to the concrete. So being able to note where they are, each individual student, is going to help you facilitate that progression. And the last one is process standards. Process standards, we know, are just as important as our content standards. So we're monitoring how well they understand a concept. We also need to be monitoring how well they understand process standards. These are the skills that are going to be needed and stay the same regardless of what the content is. So whether you're in geometry or computation or algebraic thinking, those process standards are going to stay consistent. And the process standards are also going to focus on a student's process. So not just if they can do the math, but how did they do the math? How did they get to that answer? What did their process look like? Being able to keep notes on a student's process that they chose is going to be really beneficial to you as the teacher. So in order to take notes, we have an example note sheet here on the screen. This is an example note sheet that a lot of teachers are using. Some teachers have edited it, changed it. You need to make it work for you, but this is one that we have found to be very user-friendly and quick and easy to get the information that you need in that precious, valuable, short amount of time that you have students in small group. So this is a sheet that you will notice at the top you write the student's name. So this is one sheet for each student in your class. Obviously, as you move through units, you may need to have multiple sheets for a specific student, but having one sheet of notes or one student's information on one page, we have found to be helpful when you have parent phone calls, being able to just look at one sheet instead of trying to filter through all of your small group notes, being able to take your note sheet for a specific student to a meeting, whether it's an RTI or any sort of those data meetings where you are talking about one student in particular. So this is a sheet, and we have found that the more things on our sheet that we were able to include as a check mark, the more data that we were able to gather in a very short amount of time. So some of the things that we have added to our form helped us to really hone in on which process standards a mathematician was using, and also notice that progression from concrete to pictorial to abstract that we talked about. And we also took a cue from our Fontes and Pinnell prompting guides to just kind of bring our mindfulness of our movements from that teaching to the prompting to the reinforcing. So those are kind of the three things that you're going to notice on this note sheet. The process standards over on the left. Lots of teachers use those boxes in a different way. Some people have a smiley face if they noticed that they were demonstrating a strong understanding of one of the process standards. Some people put a check mark if they were demonstrating a strong understanding. Some people circle the process standards that maybe they're not seeing, or circle a process standard that they want to be sure to talk about later that a student was struggling with. Then over on the other side, you have the date and the skill. So the concept, the math, what is it that you were teaching that day? And then you can note that concrete, pictorial, abstract. Maybe I saw a student doing our skill of division and they were doing it concretely. I could just write division and check that concrete box. And then at the bottom, the teaching, prompting, reinforcing, like I said, from the Fontes and Pinnell prompting guides. So to just let us start to see some of those patterns that I was talking about, if I always see that I am reinforcing and they're completing something concretely, and I'm reinforcing and they're completing something concretely, and I'm reinforcing and they're completing something concretely, it's going to allow me to see that pattern and allow me to know I need to ask them the next day, hey, could you try and do that pictorially? Could you try and draw a picture if maybe you didn't have that toolkit with you for a certain problem? So it's really helping you to guide those next moves by seeing what is it that students are doing each and every day. So if you are looking for an example of this particular note sheet, you can find it on the portal under small group resources, and it will be there for you to edit and change and use however you see best fits you and your classroom. So hopefully this was helpful in monitoring and assessing your small group.